This video talks about using the RTC Eclipse client for artifact management of non-source code files such as Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoint presentations, etc. And the reason why you might want to use the Eclipse client to manage these non-source code artifacts are the limitations of the web client. And the limitations of the web client are as follows. The web client only allows for check-in and check-out of one file at a time. The web client does not allow users to move files from one folder to another. And the web client does not allow for importing of directories into RTC. So the following use case is a use case of a business analyst who only needs to access documentation in the RTC project. He's going to access the documentation through the RTC Eclipse client, bring the files locally to his file system, make changes, and deliver those changes to an RTC stream. In this example, we'll assume the role of Joe, who's a member of the BMC project. The BMC project has a stream called Release 2 with 4 components: the database component, the documentation component, the Java component, and the UI component. Joe, a business analyst, only needs to access and update files in the documentation component. Okay, the first thing Joe needs to do is to create a repository workspace flowing to the Release 2 stream. He needs a repository workspace to access and deliver files to and from the stream. So right-click on the stream and select New Repository Workspace. So you can keep the default name for the repository workspace, or you can give it a unique name and then click Next. Click Use the current repository and select Next. Joe's team likes to make their repository workspaces public, so he's going to click on that. And Joe only wants to see the documentation component in this repository workspace, so he's going to unselect the Java UI and database components. Okay, so now we're taken to the section where we have to load our repository workspace, and we want to choose the third option here. And we want to bring the files locally into our sandbox, but we don't want to import them into Eclipse. Eclipse is more of a development tool. It's a Java development tool. So if we're just changing a Word document, we just want to bring it locally to our file system. So choose the third option, select Next. And I can choose the folders in the component that I want to load, and then click on the Advanced Options. Okay, so under Advanced Options, you see the location of the sandbox. The default location of the sandbox was set up when you first logged into the Eclipse Workbench. You could put the sandbox anywhere, though. You could change it to your P drive if you wanted to, or another directory on your C drive, or a network directory. And then we're going to load the stream, we're going to select the third option, load the selected folders but do not create Eclipse projects. So it's going to load the files and folders into this location where you specified the sandbox, but it's not going to bring them into the Eclipse Workbench. The reason you don't want to do that is it's very hard to work with Word files within the Java perspective, because when you double click to open it up, it opens it up within a view within that perspective. So much easier to work with the files locally and just not import them into the Eclipse Workbench. So select the third option and select Finish. And select Finish. Okay, so we get this dialog box now that pops up saying you have chosen to load content without creating an Eclipse project. And that's right. We brought the content, we brought the folders onto the local file system, into the sandbox, but we haven't loaded it into the Eclipse Workbench. So we can't go into the Eclipse perspective and see the files. If we want to access the files, we go to the local file system. And it goes on to say that this means that you will not be able to edit or otherwise work with this content within Eclipse, which is correct. unless you import it into the Eclipse workbench at a later time. So we're just going to click on OK to continue. Okay, so now I'm on my file system. Under the RTC workspace, I see the BMC folder, which corresponds to my project. I see my 3 folders, which are part of the components. I also see a .jaz5 folder, which syncs up remote changes to changes in the repository workspace. There's also a .metadata folder, and when I specified my Eclipse workspace, it basically created this metadata folder. So from here, if I want to change a document, I just go into the folder and I update the document. So in this example, we go into the release notes file, open the file, make a change, and save the change locally. So now back in RTC, still in the work item perspective in the pending changes view, I click on the refresh button. I select refresh sandbox and remote changes. And this shows the changes in the unresolved folder, which means the changes are local, but they're not checked into the repository workspace. So you right click on the unresolved folder and you say check in all. So now the changes are packaged into a change set in the outgoing folder. And now you're going to go in, name the change set, and deliver the changes to the stream. So I see the change set. Now I'm just going to go put a comment on the change set before I deliver it. And we put on the comment basic change. And we right click and select deliver. Okay, now you can see that our documentation component doesn't have any unresolved incoming or outgoing changes, so it's in sync with the stream. Okay, so now if I want to get files from the stream that other people have updated, I can go back to the pending changes view. I can see in my incoming folder change sets that I don't have in my repository workspace. So what I do is I just right click on the incoming folder and select accept. Okay, so now after we've accepted the changes, that change set, those files are now stored on the file system at the location where we specified the sandbox. And also notice in the pending changes view, the documentation folder is in sync. There are no unresolved incoming or outgoing changes. In this example, we looked at artifact management using the RTC Eclipse client. A business analyst was able to access documentation in a stream by creating a repository workspace and then loading that repository workspace. But he chose an option of loading the files into the sandbox but not importing those files into his Eclipse workspace. So he was able to go onto his local file system, make changes to the file, and then deliver those files back to the stream. In later videos, we'll show how to deal with conflicts that may arise when 2 or more people change the same file at the same time. And we'll also look at the RTC locking model within the Eclipse client to prevent conflicts. So thank you for your time and thanks for watching.